When my father threw my clothes on the wet driveway and told me I was a worthless failure, I promised myself I would never look back. 5 years later, he walked into my executive boardroom, begging for a loan to save his house, and he had no idea I owned the entire bank. That moment, the moment his eyes met mine across that long mahogany table, is one I had imagined 1,000 times in 1,000 dark, hungry nights. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for how quiet I felt. Not angry, not triumphant, just quiet, like the ocean after a storm has passed, as I had already won. Long before he ever walked through that door. My name is Margaret, and I need you to understand something before I tell you this story. I did not grow up hating my family. I grew up loving them, with everything I had, with every single piece of myself. Our house sat at the end of a long gravel road in rural Ohio. A 2-story house with a wraparound porch and a big oak tree out front that my grandfather had planted before I was born. From the outside, it looked like the kind of home that held warmth. From the inside, it held something else entirely. My father, Gerald, was the kind of man who believed that love was something you earned, not given, earned. And in our house, the currency of love was very simple. You were valuable if you were loud, if you were charming, if you made your father proud in front of other people. My 2 older brothers, Dennis and Raymond, had mastered that currency from the time they could walk. Dennis had my father's square jaw and his booming laugh. He could tell a story at the dinner table that made everyone forget their food was going cold. Raymond was the athlete, the golden boy, the one whose trophies lined the hallway shelf like little monuments to everything my father wished he had been at that age. And then there was me, Margaret, the quiet one, the one who read books in the corner, the one who kept spreadsheets in a notebook because numbers made sense to her in a way that people sometimes didn't. I was not loud. I was not charming. I did not play sports. I worked. From the time I was 14 years old, I worked. I bagged groceries at the store on Route 9 every Saturday morning. I tutored the neighbors' children in arithmetic on Sunday afternoons for $8 an hour. Every dollar I made, I handed to my mother. Not because she asked. Because I saw the electric bill sitting unopened on the counter. Because I noticed when the pantry got thin toward the end of the month. Because while Dennis and Raymond were being celebrated at Friday night football games and Saturday parties, I was the one quietly making sure the lights stayed on. My mother, Eleanor, was not a cruel woman. I want to be fair to her. She was not cruel. She was simply absent. Not physically. She was there every day, cooking, ironing, sitting in her chair by the window. But emotionally, she had given everything she had to my father and my brothers. And by the time she got to me, there was simply nothing left. I used to tell myself that was okay. I used to tell myself I didn't need it. I was wrong. The first time I remember feeling truly invisible was the summer I turned 17. I had been working 2 jobs that June, the grocery store and an early morning shift at the bakery downtown, saving every dollar I could. My father's truck needed a new transmission. It was going to cost $1,100. Money we did not have. I had saved $940 over 4 months. I walked up to my father one evening while he was sitting on the porch, and I placed that money in his hand. $940 in cash. Every single dollar I had saved. He looked at it. He looked at me. And then he called into the house for Dennis. Dennis came out, looked at the money and shrugged. "That's what she should be doing," he said. "She's not good at anything else." And my father laughed. Not a mean laugh. Just a laugh. Like it was simply the truth stated plainly. I walked back inside. I did not cry. I had learned very early that tears were a kind of weakness in that house. Instead, I opened my notebook and wrote down 3 words. Remember this feeling. The years that followed were more of the same. Dennis was given a car for his 21st birthday. A used one, yes, but a car. Raymond had his college tuition paid every semester without question. I applied for every scholarship I could find. I got 2 of them, partial ones. I took out loans for the rest. I worked throughout every year of college, waitressing on weekends, filing documents at an accounting firm during the week. I called home every Sunday. My mother would tell me about Dennis's new business idea, about Raymond's promotion, about what my father thought of this and what my father thought of that. She would ask me if I was eating enough. She rarely asked what I was doing, and I was doing a great deal. I graduated with a degree in finance and a minor in business law. I had a 3.9 GPA. I had been offered an entry-level analyst position at a regional investment firm in Columbus. I came home for the graduation weekend with 2 tickets, one for my parents and one for whoever they chose to bring. My father told me he had already committed to attending Raymond's golf tournament that same weekend. Raymond was not even in the tournament. He had simply mentioned it at dinner, and my father had seized on it like a man reaching for solid ground. I attended my own college graduation alone. I sat in that auditorium, in my robe and my cap, surrounded by families clutching flowers and cameras, and I told myself it didn't matter. It mattered. I moved to Columbus in August of that year and threw myself into work. The firm was demanding. The hours were long. The senior analysts were competitive in the way that only people who feel slightly insecure can be competitive, sharply, quietly, and constantly. I thrived. Numbers were my language. Data told me stories that other people couldn't read. I could look at a balance sheet and feel, almost physically, where the weaknesses lived and where the hidden strength was buried. Within 18 months, I had been promoted twice. Within 3 years, I was managing a mid-sized portfolio and being asked to sit in on executive strategy meetings. I called home less, not out of bitterness, out of practicality. The calls left me feeling hollowed out in a way that took days to refill. But I never stopped sending money. Every month, without fail, I transferred $300 to my mother's account. She never mentioned it at dinner. She never told my father where it came from. I know this because one Christmas, my father made a comment about how the family was finally getting by on its own without relying on anyone's charity. I sat across the table from him and said nothing. I simply cut my turkey and chewed slowly. The breaking point came in the spring. I had been home for a long weekend, my first visit in almost a year. Things were tight at the house. My father's hardware distribution business was hemorrhaging money because he had stubbornly refused to modernize his inventory system, refused to move any of his catalog online, refused to listen to anyone who suggested the world was changing. I spent 2 evenings at the kitchen table putting together a restructuring proposal. A real one, 15 pages with charts and projections and a clear 3-year path back to profitability. I presented it to my father on the Sunday afternoon before I drove back to Columbus. He looked at it. He pushed it back across the table. "I've been running this business for 22 years, he said. "I don't need a lecture from a girl who's been playing with numbers for 3. Dennis was sitting nearby. He smirked. I picked up the papers and I went upstairs and I packed my bag. The final break happened 3 weeks later. A supplier called my father, an old contact of mine who I had spoken to months earlier in an attempt to quietly negotiate better pricing for the business without making a production of it. The supplier mentioned my name. My father called me that night. He did not ask for an explanation. He accused me of going behind his back, of undermining him, of trying to make him look weak in front of a man he'd known for 15 years. I tried to explain. I tried to tell him I had been helping. He didn't want to hear it. What I heard instead was Dennis in the background. "She's always thought she was smarter than everyone. Let her go." My father's voice dropped to something I had never heard before. Cold. Final. "You have embarrassed this family for the last time. If you want to play businesswoman, go do it somewhere else. You are not welcome in this house." I said very quietly, "Dad." He said, "I'm done." And he hung up. 3 days later I drove home. I did not know why. Some old instinct maybe. Some hope that in the daylight things would look different. That my mother would have spoken to him. That there would be a conversation and opening a crack in the wall. I pulled into the driveway. My father came out of the front door before I had even turned off the engine. He did not say a word. He walked to the side of the porch, picked up a garbage bag he had apparently prepared, and threw it into the driveway. My clothes, my books, a photograph, a few small things from my childhood bedroom, in a wet, black garbage bag on the gravel. He pointed down the road. My mother stood at the window. She did not come outside. My brother's cars were both in the driveway. Neither of them came outside either. I got out of my car. I picked up the bag. I put it in the trunk. I got back in. And I drove away. I did not look in the rearview mirror. Not once. Not because I was strong, but because I knew that if I looked back I would stop. And I had promised myself I would never stop again. I drove straight to Columbus. I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment building at 11:30 at night. I sat in the car for a long time. I did not cry. I had no more of that left. What I had was something colder and cleaner and more useful. Clarity. I knew, sitting in that parking lot, exactly what I was going to do. I was going to build. Within the week, I had made 2 decisions. The first was that I was cutting off all contact. No calls, no letters, no holiday visits, no exceptions. Not out of rage. Out of survival. Because I had learned, finally and completely, that every time I allowed that family back into my life, they took something from me. Not money. Not time. Something harder to replace. They took my belief in myself. And I needed every single piece of that now. The second decision was to leave Columbus. I had been offered a position in Chicago, a senior analyst role at a much larger investment firm. I had hesitated because Columbus felt safe, familiar. I stopped hesitating. I packed what I owned into my car, drove north, and started again. Chicago was a different world. Bigger. Faster. Less forgiving of anything that wasn't excellence. I loved it immediately. The firm was called Hargrove Capital. Mid-size by Chicago standards, serious by any standard. I was one of 12 analysts, the only woman at the senior level, and younger than most of my colleagues by nearly a decade. I did not socialize much. I worked. I was at my desk before anyone else arrived, and I was there when the cleaning crew came through at night. I read everything I could get my hands on: market analysis, acquisition structures, banking regulation, international capital flows. I was building something in my mind. A map. A long, patient map of how money moved through institutions and which institutions sat at the most powerful junctions of that map. I had a theory. Regional banks were being overlooked. While everyone was focused on the giants, the national players and the investment houses, the regional banks that served mid-sized businesses and local markets were quietly undervalued. They had deep community relationships, loyal deposit bases, and asset portfolios that sophisticated buyers were simply not paying attention to. I wrote a 40-page analysis. I presented it to the managing director of Hargrove Capital on a Thursday afternoon. His name was William Hargrove III. He was 62 years old, silver-haired, deeply skeptical of people who hadn't spent 30 years earning their seat at the table. He read the analysis over the weekend. On Monday morning, he called me into his office and offered me a partnership track position. I was 28 years old. By 31, I had made partner at Hargrove Capital. By 34, I had led the acquisition of 3 regional banks in the Midwest, restructured 2 of them, and taken 1 public. By 36, I had quietly, patiently, and strategically acquired a controlling interest in a 4th bank, a mid-size regional institution called Meridian National Bank, and restructured its board. I was the majority stakeholder. I was, by every technical and legal definition, the owner. I had done it through a series of holding companies and investment vehicles precisely designed to keep my name out of the public record. Not for any dramatic reason. Simply because I had learned that power, real power, does not announce itself. It waits. I lived modestly. A clean apartment in Lincoln Park. A sensible car. No social media presence of any kind. No interviews. No profiles in business magazines. My colleagues knew who I was. A small circle of attorneys and financial professionals knew the full picture. But to the broader world, Margaret Calloway was simply a very good, very private, very quiet investment professional. No one needed to know more than that. Not yet. I thought about my family sometimes. Not with bitterness. Not with longing. With something more like observation. I wondered how Dennis's business ideas were going. I wondered if Raymond still played golf. I wondered if my mother still sat in her chair by the window. I never called to find out. I had made my peace with the silence. The silence had, in many ways, saved me. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October. I was sitting at my desk at the Meridian National offices, going through quarterly reports, when my executive assistant Claire knocked and opened the door. "There's a meeting request," she said. "A Gerald Calloway and his sons. They're requesting a sit-down with the CEO of Meridian to discuss an emergency loan application. Their representation says it's urgent. Something about avoiding foreclosure." I set down my pen. I looked out the window at the gray October sky over Chicago. Gerald Calloway. My father. "When are they requesting the meeting?" I asked. They asked for as soon as possible, Claire said. Their attorney is saying they're facing foreclosure on both the family property and the business warehouse within the next 60 days. I was quiet for a long moment. Schedule it for Thursday, I said. 2 o'clock. Should I send them the standard prep documents? I thought about the garbage bag on the wet driveway. I thought about my mother standing at the window. I thought about the graduation I attended alone. Yes, I said. The standard documents. Nothing more. I went back to my quarterly report. And I waited. Thursday arrived the way important days sometimes do, quietly, with no particular fanfare, as though the world had decided not to mark the occasion. The morning was gray and cool. I arrived at the office at 7:30 as usual. I moved through the day with perfect calm. At 1:45, Claire knocked. They're here, she said. Conference room B. Thank you, I said. Tell them I'll be with them shortly. Offer them water. I stood at my window for a moment. 41 floors above Michigan Avenue. The lake in the distance, cold and silver and enormous. I had spent years imagining this moment. In most of those imaginings, I had felt something large, something hot and loud. What I actually felt was very small and very still. Like a door quietly swinging open. I put on my jacket. I picked up the folder Claire had prepared, the loan application materials, the financial analysis, and the 2 documents my attorneys had drawn up the evening before. And I walked down the hall. Conference room B was a long formal space. Floor-to-ceiling windows on one side. A 14-seat mahogany table. A panel of recessed lighting overhead that cast everything in a clean, neutral glow. When I entered, my back was to the room. This was by design. My executive chair, the one at the head of the table, faced the window wall. I had asked Claire to arrange it that way. I sat down. I opened the folder in front of me. I heard the door close behind me. I heard them in the room. My father's breathing, heavy the way it had always been when he was nervous. Dennis's voice, low and controlled, saying something to someone beside him. The careful voice of a man trying to project confidence he doesn't feel. Raymond, quieter than I remembered. And then a fourth voice, their attorney, a man named Fielding, introducing the meeting with the practiced ease of someone who had done this many times and knew it was going badly. Thank you for making time for us, Ms., he began. I'll handle the introduction, I said. My voice was calm, clear. The voice of someone who owned the room she was sitting in. I let a beat of silence rest there. Then I turned the chair around. I have thought about this moment many times since. I have tried to find words adequate to describe what happened in those first few seconds when my face came into view. The best I can offer is this. It was as though every person in that room had been standing on solid ground, and the ground simply stopped being solid. My father saw me first. The color drained from his face the way water drains from a glass, completely, instantly, leaving something pale and hollow behind. His mouth opened. No sound came out. Dennis's chair scraped backward, a physical involuntary recoil, and then he caught himself and sat absolutely still with both hands on the table, as if the table were the only thing keeping him from falling. Raymond looked at me and looked away and looked at me again, as though his eyes were telling him something his mind refused to accept. The attorney looked around the room, confused by the sudden silence, and then looked back at me and said nothing. I folded my hands on the folder in front of me. Hello, Dad, I said. Just that. The silence lasted a long time. Long enough that the clock on the wall, which I had never noticed before, became audible. My father's mouth worked for a moment before words came. Margaret, he said. Just my name. As though he was testing whether it was real. Margaret, we didn't know, we had no idea that you were. No, I said. You didn't. I opened the folder. I've reviewed your loan application, I said. The full application, the supporting financials, the business history, and the personal asset documentation your attorney provided. Dennis found his voice. Maggie, look, if we had known it was you, we would have come to you directly. You know that. We're family. I looked at him. Are we? I said. He looked down at the table. I continued. Callaway Hardware Distribution has been insolvent for approximately 26 months, I said. The operating losses in the last fiscal year alone represent a 41% decline from an already weakened baseline. The warehouse facility is mortgaged at 112% of its current assessed value. The family residence has 2 outstanding liens. The personal savings accounts, both of them, hold a combined balance of less than $9,000. The loan application requests $800,000. At current market rates with this risk profile, the repayment structure would require monthly payments that exceed your projected monthly revenue by a factor of roughly 2.3, which means that even if I approved this loan, you would default within 14 months. The bank would then be forced to accelerate, and you would lose everything you are trying to save only later, and with significantly more damage to your credit standing. The loan is denied. My father's composure cracked. Not dramatically, not with shouting or tears. It cracked the way old wood cracks slowly, along lines that had been forming for a very long time. Margaret, he said. Please. The house. Your mother, she's been there 50 years. We just need time. We just need someone to believe in us. And there it was. The word he had never once applied to me. Believe. I let it sit in the air between us. Then I said very quietly, I handed you $940 when I was 17 years old, and you laughed. He said nothing. I came home when you were struggling and I built you a restructuring plan, and you called me arrogant. He closed his eyes. I tried to help your business quietly without taking any credit, and you threw my clothes on the driveway. The clock ticked. I have thought about this moment for 5 years, I said. And in all that time I never once imagined that when it came, you would ask me to believe in you. I reached into the folder and produced 2 documents. I slid them across the table. These are not foreclosure papers, I said. I want to be clear about that. I am not here to destroy you. That has never been my goal. The first document is the formal loan denial from Meridian National Bank. Standard form. No unusual language. The second document is a personal letter. From me to you. It is not a legal document. You are not required to read it. But I would ask that you do. I stood up. I also want you to know something, I said. Over the course of 11 years, while you were building a business that was slowly failing, I transferred $300 a month to Mom's personal account. Every single month without exception. I did it because she was my mother and because I could and because it was the right thing to do regardless of how either of you treated me. My father made a sound. Low. Barely audible. The sound of a man understanding something for the first time that he should have understood long ago. I have arranged for your attorney to receive a referral to a colleague of mine who specializes in restructuring, I said. He is excellent and his initial consultation is at no cost. That's the help I'm able to offer you. I looked at each of them. Dennis, who could not meet my eyes. Raymond, whose hands were clasped tightly on the table. My father, who looked older than I remembered. Smaller. Take care of yourselves, I said. And I walked out. I did not take the elevator. I took the stairs 41 floors because I needed the movement, the physicality, the realness of one foot in front of the other. I came out at the bottom into the parking garage, and I stood there for a moment in the cool, dim quiet. And for the first time in a very long time I cried. Not from pain. Not from triumph. From something that I think was release. The weight of 17 years set down at last. I want to leave you with something. Not a lecture. Not a speech. Just a quiet truth that I have carried in my chest for most of my adult life, and that I now understand completely. Arrogance is not strength. It dresses like strength. It sounds like strength. In certain lights, at certain angles, it can even look like strength. But arrogance is just fear wearing a loud coat. My father was afraid. Afraid that if he acknowledged my contribution, if he looked at me, really looked at me and said, Margaret, you are capable and worthy and I see you, then something in his world would shift. Some carefully built story about who mattered in that family would have to be rewritten. That story was more important to him than I was. And so he chose the story. And the story cost him everything. I do not hate my father. I want to be honest with you about that. I don't. I think he was a man shaped by his own damage, passing that damage forward the way people often do. Not because they are evil, but because they don't know how to stop. But understanding someone's pain does not mean accepting their cruelty. You can have compassion for a person and refuse to let them diminish you. You can love someone and decide that their presence in your life is more harmful than their absence. That is not coldness. That is survival. That is wisdom. The letter I left on that conference table said 3 things. The first was that I forgave him. Not for his sake. For mine. Because forgiveness is not something you give to someone else. It is something you give to yourself. A way of setting down the weight so you can walk freely. The second was that I had always loved him, even when it hurt, even when he made it impossible, even when love felt like a foolish, one-sided thing. The third was that I would not be returning to the family home. Not because I couldn't, but because some doors, once they close, are better left that way. Some chapters are complete, and it is okay to turn the page. If you are listening to this story today, maybe you have felt what I felt. That particular loneliness of being in a family but not truly of it. That exhaustion of working twice as hard for half the recognition. That moment when someone who should have protected you made you feel like the smallest, least important thing in the room. I want you to hear this clearly. Your worth was never theirs to determine. It never was. The people who couldn't see your value were simply people with limited vision. That is their tragedy, not yours. Keep building. Keep working quietly and patiently on the life that only you can see yet. Let the noise die down. Let the doubters say what they say. And trust, deeply trust, that the world has a way of righting itself. Karma is not a dramatic thing. It doesn't arrive with thunder and lightning and a dramatic speech. It arrives on a quiet Thursday afternoon in October, on the 41st floor, in a gray business suit, with a folder of documents and a steady voice. And it is so much more satisfying than anything you could have forced or rushed or engineered. Thank you for sitting with me today, for listening to this story. These stories are not easy to tell, but I believe there is something important in the telling, in saying out loud that people who work hard and love quietly and refuse to give up, even when everything and everyone around them seems designed to break them, those people matter. You matter. If this story moved you in any way, if you felt it somewhere real and deep, I would be so grateful if you would subscribe to this channel and join our community. We tell stories here about real human experiences, about betrayal and resilience and the long, slow arc of justice. Stories for people who understand that the most powerful revenge is not anger. It is success. And before you go, I have one question for you, and I would love to see your answer in the comments below. If you were in my place, would you have forgiven your family? Or would you have done exactly what I did? There is no wrong answer. I would genuinely love to know.